Hey, what's going on, everybody? How you guys doing? My name is Matt Jarba. Welcome back to another episode of Podio Commentary. And today we're going to be discussing the 1989 film, The Return of the Musketeers. Previously on the show, I talked about the Three Musketeers and the Four Musketeers, which is really just part one and part two of the same story. This time, this is actually an adaptation of the 1845 novel 20 Years After, which was written by Alexandre Dumas. And it is a continuation of the story of the Three Musketeers 20 years after the saving of France and the defeat of Cardinal Richelieu and everybody else. And this is one that I'm not going to lie, I was a bit apprehensive after I got done watching the Three Musketeers and the Four Musketeers, because it wasn't that I disliked the movies. It was just that I was kind of like, I just don't want more of like the dumb comedy. But as I've come to realize, and I didn't know this until after I already recorded the previous episode, the Three Musketeers, the story is actually largely satirical around the time it was written. It was written in the mid 1800s, and it was more or less kind of like making fun in some ways, being absurd in some ways about the time of which it was written and about the time that it was discussing, real life events and things along those lines. And so while it is a swashbuckling epic, it's also full of kind of kind of like douchey characters, which was pretty actually represented in the first two movies. And I wasn't the only one to think that. I came across a review on YouTube as I was uploading my Podio commentary on that. And I watched it, and the guy was like, had the exact same complaints I had, which tells me that it's more of a feature and not a bug, I guess, when it comes to this particular story. But that guy also, like me, was very much growing up with the 1993 movie. And I feel like because we both grew up with that 1993 movie, we're looking at these characters through the lens of honor and the lens of, the all for one for all, stand up against the bad guys, fight for justice, all that kind of stuff, which is, it's there, but it's handled in a way that seems kind of odd. And so when I was approached by H-Barts to also watch this movie, because he sponsored the first two films and this one as well, I was, kind of eager to get the whole thing over with, I'll fully admit, just because of how I felt about the first two films. Gotta say, the tagline for this movie, all for one and fun for all, is actually pretty accurate. While this is like the least liked movie in this particular trilogy of films, and I mean this both critically as well as audience reception wise, it is the one that I felt was the most fun, and it definitely felt like the most complete. And I think a big part of that was it wasn't trying to pad out a 3-hour epic into like two films where they really needed to like play up some of the more dumber elements. This was a lot more streamlined and a lot more effective in its storytelling. Richard Lester, I think, kind of understood the assignment for this one. However, tragedy did strike while they were filming it, and we will definitely talk about that because, after the success of the first two films, right, 1973, 1974, obviously makes kind of sense to go back in and go back to the world to see what happens 20 years later, right? With the same cast. You've got Michael York, you've got Oliver Reed, Christopher Lee comes back as Rochefort, who I thought was dead. Turns out he wasn't dead. He took a complete, scathing from a sword, right through his body. And he was left to bleed out on the ground, but nope. He survived and then ultimately ended up in jail and was brought back out in order to be a guard. Kind of interesting there. But no, the movie brought back everybody. Richard Chamberlain as Aramis. You had Geraldine Chaplin as the Queen Anne of Austria. You had, Frank Finlay as Porthos. Everybody. Roy Kinnear back as Planchet, although unfortunately he did pass away during the filming of the movie. What happened with that was there was a scene where he was going to be riding a horse, and there was a miscommunication with the director and the Spanish film crew, about where to put sand. And as Roy Kinnear was writing, he ended up taking a fall because he'd only really had about a 15-minute practice session with riding a horse, unfortunately, right? So this is what's going on here. So the Spanish crew misunderstood the instructions when it came to putting sand on the cobblestone street before filming, in the belief that it would create more grip. And this is where Kinnear was only given like one 15-minute practice ride before the take. And when they came and they were riding and they came to a stop, Kinnear's horse slipped, and he, not a confident horseman at all, fell off. He broke his pelvis. He then was taken to a nearby hospital in Madrid, and a couple days later, he actually died from a heart attack brought on by his injuries. So he was older at the time. You know, he was definitely out of shape. If you've watched the movie, it opens with him. He's in the movie a number of times, and he was in the first two films as well. And you can tell that he's older, right? Because the first two were shot in 1972. This one was shot in 1988, 16 years later. And that kind of trauma to the body can absolutely bring on a heart attack. And it's tragic and it's unfortunate. And then also following his death, his wife actually filed a lawsuit against the production company. And she ultimately was awarded 650,000 euros in damages. And then a court later ruled that the hospital was actually 60% liable for Roy's death, and then ordered them to pay out 60% of the payout figure. Richard Lester himself didn't like he doesn't like talking about this movie. He will talk about the first two films, but he doesn't talk about Return of the Musketeers. He actually says here in an interview, "I really won't talk about the Return of the Musketeers. I never have, and I won't now, but I think you can draw your own conclusions." And I mean, it's kind of sad when, you've got a situation like this where obviously the director is completely just like not happy with what happened. You know what I mean? Like just not happy with everything. And after this, he never actually really went back to go and direct any other movies. Keep in mind, I forgot to mention this before. He also did Superman 2, right? I mean, Superman 2 is an iconic film, but like, he never went back to do another movie. He only went back a couple years later to do the concert film Get Back for Paul McCartney, because, he's friends with the Beatles and they trust him. And that was just a concert film, no stunt work, nothing like that. And so he's still alive. He's in his 80s now. He's definitely getting up there in years. But it just killed him, and that's always sad when you get to a movie like this and you're at the later end of your career and, you have such a tragedy happen and it was an accident, and that it just kind of kills your motivation to continue going forward, So I feel really bad about that. I do feel really bad about that. Like when I found that out, I was like really like, wow, that's actually like really sad. That's really tragic. You know what I mean? It's just holy crap. Anyway, that was kind of like the real tragedy of the filmmaking. I mean, obviously, when they went to go make this movie, this is one that was, based on just a different story in the lives of D'Artagnan, now a lieutenant in the guard of the Musketeers. He doesn't really have much going on for him. He's got no wife. He's got no children. He has since then just kind of like become a soldier. And that's what he's done. And he's done it well. He's done it honorably and everything else, but he doesn't have anything. His boots are falling apart when we find him in the movie. He's not being paid well enough. He doesn't have really status or anything else. And here's where you get, Cardinal Mazarin, who is kind of like the Cardinal Richelieu of this movie. Except the funny thing too is that Mazarin is about obtaining power by sleeping with the Queen and then kind of having control over King Louis. And that kind of leads into the Man in the Iron Mask storyline. That's a subplot from another book that, again, doesn't get mentioned here at all because it's in the future, and it becomes an entirely different movie. That's actually one maybe worth giving another watch to. But Mazarin is interesting because he hires D'Artagnan to come on in and then, work for him, and to then go and find the other musketeers to then work for him, to more or less, I would assume, do wet work for Mazarin. And there's a line about that, that Athos has with D'Artagnan in the movie, about it being basically kind of like soldiers for hire sort of thing, right? Now, what I find to be really also fascinating about this is, like, Charlton Heston didn't come back as Cardinal Richelieu. And the reason why is because in the books at that time, the cardinal was dead. The real life cardinal in history was dead. So there's really no point to have him. However, Heston does have a bit of a cameo appearance in the movie in the form of a portrait, of a painting. And he actually allowed the filmmakers to use his likeness for that painting, provided that he got it after production. And even he is quoted as saying, "It's a good portrait. I'm very fond of it. It's very much in the style of the period." And I mean, to be fair, I can't fault that. I can't knock that. I got to love it, to be honest with you. That's Heston just going like, "I'm not going to be in your movie, but I'm going to want your painting." Why not? Screw it, right? Like, yeah, you get some cool artwork out of it, of yourself. You put it over your bed, and there you go. Impress the ladies. In one point in time, I was a cardinal. But going back to the concept of Cardinal Richelieu for a second, right? Because like in the 93 movie, Tim Curry plays him wonderfully, and he's this like vile creature of a villain. But the way Heston played Cardinal Richelieu, and after reading more about the character in the books, I kind of grew a greater appreciation of him, because he really was doing everything for the benefit of France. I mean, yeah, it benefited him, but he wasn't like out there to just like take control and rule with an iron fist. He was legitimately playing the game for the betterment of the people of the country. So that does kind of give it a whole different dynamic. And it's one where it shows you that the political, like there was a lot of gray in the original book that comes through in the movie. But then again, my own bias made me go, well, yeah, like I'm looking at this kind of going like the movie I loved as a kid, the movie I love as an adult, these characters that I love, the way that they're portrayed is not necessarily book accurate. And so seeing something that is actually more book accurate, even though I thought it was, insanely silly at times, okay, fine. Like, yeah, I kind of get that now. And I realized that there were some problems with that, obviously, So for me, kind of looking back on it, I need to reassess it. And I might go back and rewatch those movies with that in mind. Because had I known that going in, it probably would have altered my opinion of it. But that being said, it's kind of like, you can't always expect it, right? Like how much pre-research do you need to do before watching a movie? And this is actually one of the, this is really interesting just in regards to being a case study, because when you look at movies that are based on adaptation, that are going to be adaptations of a book, a play, a show, whatever, right? And they do that, and things are altered, things are changed, right? Like if you don't know the source material, you're largely only going to look at as what is presented, and you're going to trust that is very representative of the source material. And in this case, the 93 movie is not. It's a great film. It's a wonder. I fucking love that movie, right? Stephen Herrick did a great job. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Come on, man. Same director. But looking at it now through that lens, and I know I'm kind of like using this as a bit of a way to kind of like, I guess, explain the previous Podio commentary, but new information came to light, and I just find it to be very fascinating. Anyway, getting back to this movie, Cardinal Mazarin definitely is about himself, but he's not about really kind of doing anything other than maintaining control. He's not like vile in the sense of, he's scheming terribly. He really is just kind of out for his own bits, and he is with the queen, and the queen is nuts at this particular point in time. She was nuts in the first movie too. She was all like, "Oh, I love the Duke of Buckingham." And then he gets iced. And so then she stays with Louis, and, he doesn't trust her. But then he dies, and she's got his kid. And so then she's ruling France with the cardinal, who is using her as a way to, stay in power as well. At the same time, there's the Duke of Beaufort, who is kind of like the people's champion, and they have him imprisoned. And we know that people are trying to like find a way to kind of free him. And that's one of the reasons why Mazarin hires D'Artagnan in order to work for him to kind of keep to keep Beaufort from getting out. And that's one of the reasons why they pull Rochefort out of prison and put him in charge of protecting Beaufort while in jail, keeping him locked up, which he fails at and then goes on his own little weird journey, because we do get an introduction to two new characters in this film. Athos has an adopted son named Raoul, played by C. Thomas Howell, fucking Pony Boy. Pony Boy is playing a French Spaniard type character who's very into astronomy and mathematics and asking the question about gravity. He's very much into the sciences. He's a dork. No, I'm kidding. He's actually, he grows on you as a character. But as he is like leaving the village to go back to the, to go back to, I think the mansion or whatever, right? He ends up coming across the body of the executioner, and he sees a priest having killed the executioner. And we find out that the executioner was the same executioner that was 20 years prior, the one who killed Milady de Winter. And then, you know, he chases after the crazy priest, who then kind of pulls off the robes, and everything is very obstructed during the sword fight. You can't see who it is. And I thought that the cinematography, they did similar things with the first movie as well, where like some of the fight scenes, the choreography wasn't necessarily great. And here they were very much intentionally trying to like obscure the look, the identity of the mysterious assassin. And then, of course, you know, when the fight's over, we come to see that it's Kim Cattrall. I didn't know Kim Cattrall was in this movie. I love Kim Cattrall. Let me just give you guys a quick side story here. Okay, so you know you'll hear stories and people go like, you know how I found out I was gay? All right, something will trigger it. I'm going to tell you this. I knew I was straight. 5 years old in San Diego watching Big Trouble in Little China for the very first time. Seeing Kim Cattrall as Grace for the very first time. And I was like, dun, 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 dun. My heart, man. I was like, that's it. I knew it. And then Mannequin, right? But here she's wearing like leather pants and she's fighting with swords. And my stupid, dumb, immature, horny brain is like, more please, more please. I love Kim Cattrall. And she's in it as Justine de Winter, the daughter of Milady de Winter, and Rochefort is her father. And I thought that was an interesting kind of take on it, because I'm like, oh, okay. In the book, right, she's gender bent for the movie. In the book, she is she's a he. She's like Jack de Winter or John de Winter or something, right? So they gender bent here to make her kind of like the love interest for Raoul. And this dude is straight up horny for her. Like he is like, dude, it's bad. It's so bad. Like, you know how like Michael York, I've mentioned this in the first one, was like all about Constance and whatnot. Like C. Thomas Howell here going after, you know, Justine is kind of like that, but like a little bit, but more honorable, because like he doesn't know the extent of like he thinks he can fix her. Okay. Like that's what it boils down to. He thinks he can fix Justine. And that, my friends, is a problem so many dudes have, right? You see a hot chick holding a sword. She gets your blood pumping. She gets other things pumping. You're feeling a certain way, but she's crazy. And deep down, you know she is crazy. Deep down, you know she will gut you in your sleep. But you still would. And that's Raoul in a nutshell. This guy's whole motivation, even to the end of the movie, is all about like, I can fix her. I love her. I can fix her. Bro, dude is hard up, man. Hard up. And I get it. It's Kim Cattrall. Okay. This is after Porky's Kim Cattrall too. Okay. Just saying, man. Like that every time she was on screen, I was all like, yay. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed the movie a little bit more. I don't know. I just thought it was more fun. But she finds out that the Comte de la Fare, which is, you know, the actual title of Athos, had hired the executioner to kill Milady de Winter. And then she finds out that Raoul's father is the Comte de la Fare. Okay. And so she's kind of going to use that a little bit to go after them. Because that's basically just like her mom in the Four Musketeers, Revenge of Milady. her entire motivation is killing these 4 people. Like, legit. That's all she wants to do, just like what her mom did. Now, ultimately, Beaufort is able to escape from prison, and then the cardinal is going to take Rochefort, like throw him back into like the prison. He escapes, runs to his daughter for help. They end up traveling, and she hates him, by the way. She fucking hates her dad. She hates Rochefort because he abandoned her in England when she was like 5. And so as a result of that, like, she's just never liked him. But he is a broken old man. He is a broken old man who is, again, trying to, like, just, save his own skin. He doesn't really want to engage with the Musketeers, even though she wants to kill them. And he, for all intents and purposes, probably wants to kill them too. But he just doesn't want to deal. He actually makes a comment in the movie about how, like, these men are fatal. And he kind of, like, rubs his chest where D'Artagnan had stabbed him, probably just narrowly missing his heart. And I think that's a really interesting way Christopher Lee approached the character. And I would have liked to have seen more Christopher Lee in the movie, but, like, every time we got him, he was a much different. He was very confident, very suave, very slimy, very grimy, manipulative in the first 2 films. Here, he's much older. He's beaten down. He's been in prison. He, I think, wants to matter. I think he wants to, like, do something, but at the same time, he's also maybe kind of also running from his past in a way that, like, Justine is going to somewhat use with him. And so they all, so then you find out that, Aramis and Athos don't want to join up with Porthos and D'Artagnan to work for Mazarin, even though, Porthos wants to be a baron. He wants, he wants, it's very similar kind of to some extent, like The Wizard of Oz, right? Each of the men wants something different, to be fair. Each of the characters in Wizard of Oz, they want something: brain, heart, home, courage, things along those lines. Well, here, he is, retired. He's married a wealthy widow. He's, got no status, but he wants status to impress the neighbors. So, D'Artagnan's like, hey, Mazarin will make you a baron. I'm just going to make that up right now, but he'll make you a baron. And so then that's Porthos's motivation, is to be a baron. Aramis is still the kind of, like, I want to say a little bit of the sleazy, conniving, priest now. He runs an abbey, and he is the queen's confessor. And he, like, clearly doesn't care, right? Like, he just has the position, and he's like, yeah, no, I'm here. It's all good, whatever. So he won't be a part of whatever it is that D'Artagnan and Porthos are up to, because he's working with Athos to protect Beaufort, which is also interesting because he is running that double agency of being the queen's confessor while also working for, like, what would be considered, like, the rebellion at that time. And we don't get a lot of Aramis in the movie at all. We really don't. And Richard Chamberlain was great as Aramis. He had that, that bravado about him, but we really don't get a lot of him in this movie. Probably because they needed to substitute one musketeer for the inclusion of Raoul, and it just made the most amount of sense that at that time Aramis is in, like, he's in this elevated position. He's got access to a bunch of stuff. He's going to do a little bit, but he's not going to compromise what he's got, which does make sense for kind of Aramis's character. But they decide to, once Beaufort escapes, they get basically hired by the Queen to go to England to rescue King Charles I, who's about to be executed. And so they go out there and they devise this plan. But, you've got Justine and Rochefort that are there working with Oliver Cromwell, who is probably more of a tactician than any of the Musketeers. And so, like, while they're there trying to, wait to bust out the king, he gets executed because, like, they take out the executioner. No one will be, they figure no one's going to want to no one's going to want to kill their king. Right. And then, of course, Justine talks Rochefort into beheading the king. And we get this one little shot of, like, the post of that, where Justine, like, just doesn't care. She is, like, smitten that they just executed a king. She doesn't have any feelings about that. Rochefort, on the other hand, is traumatized by it. He is absolutely broken by what happened. And she basically chides him for it, right? Like, you should revel. Like, not everyone gets the opportunity to kill a king, sort of thing. And it's like, but the lengths that he'll go to try to save his own ass and maybe try to even like maybe repair a relationship with the daughter, but she doesn't care about him. I mean, maybe she does a little bit. Like, we don't really get much of a sense of that. But the Musketeers, then have to try to get out of England. And it's here that they've got their escape boat. And it's here that it's already been primed with explosives because Oliver Cromwell knew about everything. He knew everything going on. So he let them come on in, let them get set up, undermined them, their plan to save the king by having him executed early. And then from there, planted all these explosives, all this gunpowder on their escape boat. And so then basically Justine's like, I want to kill them. And then he's like, get the hell out of England and never come back. So her and Rochefort, they go out to the boat. And what I thought was really interesting about this was like they get on the boat with them, but they hide away in another corridor, like in another quarter. And they know that that there's explosives all over the boat. And the plan is so kind of funny because the plan is just to get out to the sea, get the Musketeers on, get them comfortable, maybe asleep, have the crew escape to the little side boat, light the fuse, get the hell out of there and whatever. And then ultimately the Musketeers discover that there's gunpowder on the boat. So then they're all trying to get to the escape boat at the same time. And then of course a fight breaks out. Raoul had kind of already planned a way to detonate the gunpowder on a timed explosive. Rochefort had already lit a fuse to go and take it out. So then, Rochefort runs down to put out the fuse to save his daughter, really, and his own skin. And then, but he didn't know about the other secondary timer. And then the boat explodes with Justine on it, Rochefort in it. The crew is gone. The Musketeers get away. You think it's over. Well, they get back to France, and then the Cardinal is already dealing with his own, rising rebellion. So he decides to flee, and he takes King Louis with him to kind of raise him in his image, right? To more or less use him to do what he needs to do to protect himself. I wouldn't say necessarily protect France, but to protect himself. And then Justine shows up, right, at the castle. And we know that, she helped get King Louis away using her feminine wiles and whatever. There's a great line from King Louis because the kid's like 10, almost 11 years old, right? And he's already thinking 4 or 5 steps ahead. He goes like, when I get older, I'm going to marry, but I'm going to make you my mistress, and he's saying this to a woman at the time who's 33 because she was like 33 when they filmed this. And that was really funny to me. Or maybe she was a little younger than that. I got to go back and look. I think she was around 32, 33 when they filmed it. I mean, prime Kim Cattrall, make no mistake. Yes, I'm going to simp for Kim Cattrall. Okay. Leave me alone. Anyway, the Musketeers show up at the castle to go and rescue the king. And, Aramis and Aramis and Athos, corner the Cardinal, get him to basically just kind of give up the game. They go, D'Artagnan and Raoul go to rescue the king. They fight Justine. Justine almost kills the king, but she ends up diving out of a window into the water, swims away. And then Raoul is getting ready to jump out the window. And it's really funny because D'Artagnan stops him and he's just like, do you want to go after her? Because I don't. And right there, you're like, no, he wants to go after her. But the other thing about that too is the movie's over. And, a minute later, basically, and yet we don't see Raoul again. We get no update on Raoul. We get no update on Justine. The character storylines at that point in time just stop. And I understand maybe in the book it's like that. I don't know if that's in the book. But I mean, but thematically, story-wise for movies, you want some kind of, finale, some kind of wrap up, right? That was even one of my complaints with the Hobbit Battle of the Five Armies is the ending didn't have as much wrap up as they needed to have. Whereas Return of the King had so much wrap up, but it's still a great film. But there's memes about the ending of that for a reason. But what's interesting about this is they do make Porthos a baron. Aramis becomes a bishop. Raoul got commissioned into the guards. That's all we hear about that. D'Artagnan goes back to work with the guards and Athos basically goes back home. But then, they all kind of end up riding together one last time and, maybe off on another grand adventure. I don't quite know. Ultimately, the movie I think was better than the other two. I think just because it was a single story in one movie, and I think the characters were much more likable. I think the plot moved a lot faster. But obviously, the critics, they gave it positive reviews, but it wasn't necessarily received well at the box office. It was released on home video in the spring of 1990. And, and then it debuted on USA Network in 1991. So there you go. The movie exists. The trilogy of films exists. I'm very happy that they exist. I'm glad to have seen them. I as I was pointing out, like, I kind of feel like this movie was a great follow-up. There's another book that kind of goes into the whole, Man in the Iron Mask story. That would be cool to see. Now, interestingly enough, as a quick aside before I end this thing, look, Charlie Sheen could get clean. Oliver Platt's still alive. Kiefer's still rocking around. Chris O'Donnell's still rocking around. Is it, Michael Wincott, we could say he lived. Is it possible that we could, in fact, get the Return of the Musketeers from Disney, as well as maybe the next story with those characters as well? Would it be possible to maybe kind of coerce Disney into giving us these next two movies to complete a Three Musketeers trilogy? No, they would never do it, because for one, Charlie Sheen is way too gone for that. But if it could be done, I would be quite happy, actually. I would get Stephen Herrick to come back. He just got done directing that Netflix movie with Lindsay Lohan, the Christmas film. So he's still rocking around. All right, like, let's go. Like, let's effing go. Julie Delpy's still around. She could play Constance. Constance didn't die in that movie. Let's do it. Let's get a second and third film. Let's round out the Three Musketeers trilogy. Bring Bryan Adams back. Give us some more Bryan Adams music. If you guys can't tell, I'm a huge fan of the 1993 movie. If you want me to talk about that, please let me know in the comment section. Anyway, guys, this has been a fun episode of Podio Commentary. I did enjoy this film a lot more than the other ones, but at the same time, I am glad to have seen everybody. Also, quick aside, totally forgot to mention this. Billy Connolly has a quick little cameo in the movie as caddy, as a golf caddy. Billy Connolly, always awesome to see, and everything else. So yeah, if you have any movies you want me to see, definitely let me know. Please leave a like and subscribe if you are watching this on YouTube. If you are listening to this where you get your podcasts, please leave a review. And I will talk to you guys on the next episode of Podio Commentary. My name is Matt Jarbo. Oh, yeah, if you want to sponsor an episode, head on over to patreon.com/Matt Jarbo. Great way to do that. I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great day. Thank you again. Go see a movie, and peace out.